Hey there, folks, your one and only eye patch wearing, squat doing, robe donning Dino Man Trexcapades here. After recently finishing up with a 20-hour session of Call of Duty Cold War multiplayer, I want to give you some of my first impressions, tips, tricks, and a comparison of this game versus Modern Warfare and Black Ops 4. Maybe this will help you decide whether to purchase or pass on this title, or just give you an idea of what to expect when you fire up MP. Before diving in, I want to start by thanking everyone, from the viewers to the gamers that played, for making the 20-hour Cold War release stream a great success. Alright, so this video will primarily be my thoughts on the multiplayer aspect of the game after the first 20 hours played. I'm going to talk about the movement, gunplay, map design, UI design, SBMM, and some tips on settings and meta guns, and I'm going to try and do it as quickly as possible. I'm going to fire out of the gate and rate this game at a 6 out of 10. I think it's generally quite unpolished compared to the last two installments in the franchise, that being Modern Warfare and Black Ops 4, but that isn't always a bad thing, but we'll get into those details shortly. Starting from a UI design perspective, this game feels like it was designed during the Cold War. The menus, gunsmith, and camo previews in the pregame look pretty drab and unrefined. I jumped back and forth between Cold War and Modern Warfare to get a direct comparison, and really there was no comparison. Modern Warfare is much more polished on the UI and menu front. And you know what? This first impression is kind of indicative of everything about the game. It is a bare bones Call of Duty game, from the menu to the number of maps released, sitting at only 8 out of the gate, to the movement and the gun feel. Now, this bare bones feel isn't necessarily bad when it comes to wanting a basic shooter without a ton of frills, but I also think that this is in part because the dev cycle was short and during a pandemic, and there really aren't any shooter competitors out there at the moment. I'm looking at you, Battlefield. I'd call this a COVID COD, unfortunately. That said, let's talk about the maps briefly. The maps in this game are better overall than in Modern Warfare, aside from Shoot House, of course, which is a fan favorite. There are some good ones and some bad ones, of course, but generally they play better than the MW maps. Unfortunately, they only released 8 maps out of the gate, with plans to release favorites like Nuketown and Firing Range in future seasons of the game. I would have liked to see at least one of the legacy popular maps included in the initial release. While talking about map design, we might as well discuss time to kill and gameplay and compare that to MW. Time to kill is definitely a little higher than in Modern Warfare, and the game does not play as campy as Modern Warfare. I think what really held MW back were dark corners, campy maps, and mounting paired with a super fast time to kill. That made it hard for a skilled player to snap and kill a player hiding in a dark corner mounted on a box behind a head glitch. Cold War does not have mounting and doesn't feel like it has many sneaky dark areas for rat players to hide, and the fact that the time to kill is a little higher gives a skilled player a chance to snap onto a corner camper and maybe pull off something special. Also, Cold War uses score streaks instead of kill streaks, and while I think the system needs a little tweaking, I kind of like it because it doesn't encourage players to camp and hide to hold on to their coveted kill streak like in other COD titles. As far as movement, I gotta say I prefer the movement in Modern Warfare. Cold War has a very basic sprint, no tactical sprint, and sadly does not have any kind of bunny hop mechanic, which I really like the feel of in Modern Warfare. So basically you have a slide, strafe, and jump, and not a lot of combinations of those things to add too much flexibility into the movement style. I jumped into some custom lobbies between MW and Cold War, and it was very obvious to me the movement mechanics in MW had a lot more thought put into them. I will say, however, the game plays rather quickly and less tactically than MW, and that is in large part due to the fact that this game is no frills and does a decent job encouraging players to move around versus tactically guard an area. Keck W. I might as well mention at this point that if you're using keyboard and mouse, the sensitivity settings and feel of MW do not translate directly into Cold War. I had to turn down my sensitivity in Cold War for my MW settings, and it still doesn't quite feel right. I think it's more obvious than ever at this point that the game is meant to be played on a controller. Aim assist is very, very strong, and a lot of the movement advantage that perhaps a keyboard and mouse player had in the past is greatly diminished. The gunplay in Cold War feels pretty rewarding overall, but the MP5 is by far the strongest weapon at the moment, and I imagine it'll get nerfed soon, so make sure you get your gold camo on that sucker first. Speaking of camos, they look pretty good when they're on your gun in-game or in the play of the game, but they look like hot trash in the menus. Another ding on the polish level of the game. As far as other guns, it's good to see burst rifles making a comeback. The M16 and the AUG are both very, very strong and get you a 1 burst if placed well. Snipers are strong. ARs and LMGs feel pretty solid too, but I think the overall beefy, visceral feel of the guns from MW didn't quite translate into this game, which you may or may not like. Oh, by the way, the FAMAS is pretty cool once you get it leveled up, but that goes for almost any of the guns. They perform quite poorly until you get some attachments on them. Unfortunately, leveling guns takes a very, very long time, and that paired paired with the red line levels of SBMM, where every super sweat is using their fully kitted MP5 and crouch spamming behind a head glitch, makes for a frustrating gun leveling experience. Also, the gunsmith system seems a bit clunky and overdone. You can almost get away with using the first attachment in every category before getting into the calculus level meta of all the other stuff. Moving on to graphics, the game looks okay, but again, I did a quick swap between Modern Warfare and this game to get a feel for the environments, and I think overall MW did it better. I know at this point I probably sound like an MW shill, but I think the game did a ton of things right, but where they failed on the gameplay front, they really failed. Cold War does some of the gameplay things better, like having a higher time to kill and less campy maps, but it falls short bigly when it comes to overall polish and shine. While the guns may not sound and feel as beefy as in MW, I think the overall audio is better in this game when it comes to using audio cues to locate gunfire and hear footsteps. I did some testing and I prefer the default Treyarch mix to any of the other sound presets. Though the headphone preset made gunfire much easier to pinpoint, it ended up drowning out a lot of the footstep sounds. The Treyarch default mix makes footsteps easier to hear, but it's slightly tougher to pinpoint gunfire. So before I jump into a few basic graphic, gameplay, and audio settings, I'll quickly address SBMM or skill-based matchmaking. It is there, it is strong. Oh, and unless you want to get bent over faster than Hutch in a lion costume, don't play MP after about 1 to 2 a.m. If you do, bring a towel, because you'll be sweating more than Rocky fighting Drago in Rocky 4. Okay, now moving on to a few little tips and tricks that made my experience better. I've settled in at 105 FOV for Cold War. I think that's the sweet spot unless you're a super sweat with your greasy nose actually touching the monitor. Head glitches are strong in this game. It is Call of Duty after all, so I found 120 FOV a little too much to dial in on targets that blend into the background or are on a strong head glitch. While on the subject of FOV, there is a graphic setting called ADS Field of View. Your options here are independent and affected. This setting is also in Modern Warfare. When you ADS, independent will zoom the gun in as if you are on the default FOV. So if you're at a high FOV like 105 to 120, independent will really feel like it zooms the gun in a lot, which might make it harder to track targets and often makes guns feel like they have more recoil than they do, if only visual. The affected setting will keep your FOV while ADSing closer to your set value, leading to a lot less of a zoom-in effect. I'm using 105 FOV and affected for Cold War since most fights are up close and personal and you don't need much extra zoom. However, in Warzone, I'm at 105 FOV and independent to get that extra zoom when fighting mid-range or long range. As I mentioned before, I think the Treyarch mix is the best audio preset for MP. Hearing footsteps is very important. I think they're most audible with this mix. If you prefer being able to pinpoint where gunfire is coming from, I believe the headphone preset is best. On the gameplay front, the one major thing I changed was the auto mantle function. I set it so I have to press the mantle button twice, meaning mash the hell out of it, of course, in order to mantle something. This will prevent those awkward situations where you're trying to pull off a jump shot and end up in a mantle animation. So to sum it all up, I think Cold War is an okay multiplayer shooter. Its bare bones approach is successful in a lot of ways when it comes to gameplay, but you can really see the lack of polish on almost every front when compared to Modern Warfare or even Black Ops 4. Gunplay and gameplay are pretty solid, movement is unpolished and pretty inflexible, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Audio is solid, graphics are alright, SBMM is super strong, and that's why it's a 6 out of 10 experience. However, if you want to get cracked AF on mouse and keyboard, grind this game. It is hard, it is sweaty, and the dividends might pay off in Warzone, which is what we all really care about, right? Just a heads up, my plan is to grind out dark matter in this game at a casually hardcore pace. I stream on Twitch 5 days a week for lots of hours, and we have a community that I cannot express enough gratitude to. The real fireworks happen over at twitch.tv/Trexcapades. If you're interested in some of my in-game settings, they're down in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button and subscribe, okay, bruv? If you have questions or nice comments, drop them and I'll reply. Anyways, I'm out. Peace!